government is introducing Bill 9, the Protecting Alberta's Children Statutes Amendment Act. Bill 9 will invoke the Canadian Charter's Notwithstanding clause and to amend and uphold three critical pieces of legislation without further court delay or uncertainty. The Health Statutes Amendment Act 2024, the Education Amendment Act 2024, and the Fairness and Safety in Sport Act 2024. The Notwithstanding clause will apply to the following pieces of legislation. Bill 26, the Health Statute Amendment Act 2024 prohibits both gender reassignment surgery for children under 18 and the provision of puberty blockers and hormone replacement treatments for the purpose of gender reassignment to children under 16. Bill 27, the Education Amendment Act 2024 requires schools to obtain parental consent when a student under 16 years of age wishes to change his or her name or pronouns for reasons related to the student's gender identity, and requires parental opt-in consent to teaching on gender identity, sexual orientation, or human sexuality. Bill 29, the Fairness and Safety in Sport Act, requires the governing bodies of amateur competitive sports in Alberta to implement policies that limit participation in women's and girls' sports to those who were born female.
Welcome back, everybody. You know, the Alberta political party called the United Conservative Party, that's basically the merged right-of-center party that Danielle Smith leads, they are having their annual general meeting in just over a week. Rebel News will be there in a big way. We think that Danielle Smith is an interesting newsmaker and perhaps the most effective of all the provincial premiers, not only in championing Alberta causes, but trying to get Canada some action in the United States, while Doug Ford of Ontario drops stink bombs like his $75 million attack ad during the U.S. election. Yeah, that didn't really work out, did it? Danielle Smith is trying to woo our southern neighbor. We'll see how that goes. But she is doing other things like invoking the notwithstanding clause of the Constitution to protect her bills from what she is certain will be legal attacks by activist lawyers and judges who don't share her views. Joining us now to talk about this is our friend LORNE GUNTER, who wrote an article just today entitled "Smith Government's Use of Notwithstanding Clause is Within the Spirit of the Charter." And that's in the Edmonton Journal. LORNE, great to see you again. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks. Good to see you.
You know what? I'm excited about Alberta. I'm from there originally, and it was always a laboratory for ideas. Ralph Klein was from there, Stephen Harper, Preston Manning. I think Danielle Smith,
even before that, the CCF.
Yeah. I mean,
which became the NDP. So, yeah, lots of ideas come out of Alberta. Some of them good, some of them not so good.
Well, you even say the social credit. I mean, that's, you know, a mixed bag there as well. How is Danielle Smith doing in this tradition of ideological innovators? And how would you rate her recent move of bringing in rules to treat of how to handle transgender curious kids in school?
I like both her policies and her invoking the notwithstanding clause. Just start with one simple number. A couple of professors, one at UBC, one in Guelph, did a study of Supreme Court decisions pertaining to provincial laws. And in the first 30 years that the charter was in force, the Supreme Court only overturned 20% of provincial laws based on a charter focus. Since that time, the number's risen to 60%. So they strike down more than half of provincial laws. And if you have a provincial government and you got a law that you really want to keep in place, I think you have to put the notwithstanding clause in, because some judge, either at the Superior Court level or up at the Supreme Court, is going to strike it down. And particularly if it's not one of the progressive ideas. And so the three bills that Smith has brought in that are covered by the notwithstanding clause in this case are barring transgender women and girls from participating in women's and girls' sports. If a child has a desire to change their name or gender at school, the school must inform parents, and there's to be no permanent treatments, no gender-affirming treatments for under 16-year-olds. So no puberty blockers, no surgeries, none of the things that cannot be reversed. And I hear experts on the transgender side all the time say that puberty blockers can be reversed. But I have seen study after study after study that says that's simply not true.
Right.
And so those are the three bills that the Smith government wants to protect from the courts.
Yeah.
And I think that the notwithstanding clause, which was brought in when the charter was debated in 1981, is perfectly in keeping with that. That's what it's there for.
Yeah. You know, some judges have said it's a dialogue between the legislature and the judiciary. And I don't mind that description, because let it be a dialogue of, at worst, equals. Because I think what happened was the judges thought they were supreme. And that goes contrary to centuries of Canadian and British lawmaking where Parliament is supreme. So the legislature needs a way to knock the judges down a peg, not out of malice, just to keep things balanced. One thing that is on my mind, Lorne, is, as you know, judges are put through ideological training sessions. 20 years ago, it was about feminism. Then it was about racism. Now, every single judge in Canada goes through transgender orientation, where they basically taught a particular ideology. My point is, there is a 100% chance that a judge who would hear a challenge to these laws from Danielle Smith would at the very least be primed to strike them down, because they have been told you have to or you're transphobic. So I think it's critical that she preventively and preemptively makes sure that the judges don't get a big idea.
Well, and I would say not just judges, but also doctors and a lot of educators.
Right.
Not all doctors, but many doctors who got into sexual reassignment, into transgender treatment, are very much the advocates for it. And so I have heard case after case after case of parents who've taken their child to a transgender specialist, thinking that that person would then do a lot of evaluations. You do psychological evaluations, you do cultural and social evaluations, and they're offered the first treatment that day.
Right.
So, this gender affirmation treatment is built right into the system. And there are one of the arguments against the use of notwithstanding clause here is that sometimes parents in Alberta will give their consent to their child under 16 having gender affirming care. But I know that there are, not every case, but lots of cases where that's the parent trying to show how progressive they are.
Right.
So I think if you're not 16 years old, it is just too messy to start messing around with that. And I think Smith and the UCP government are quite right to protect that with the notwithstanding clause and just let it sit there.
Yeah. You know, I haven't seen any recent polls on this subject, especially in Alberta, but I would be willing to wager that ordinary people find this so obvious and such common sense, especially not having biological men in the changing room. I mean, those American cases of the swimming teams, every person was freaked out by that. And Trump, by the way, just reached in and stole the crown by saying we're going to end it. That should have been a feminist cause, but many feminists were terrified or were on the other side. I think she's going to have a lot of support from this. I don't have statistical proof of that. Have you seen any polls on the subject? Because I've got to think this is popular with the people, even if it's not popular with the lawyers, teachers, and doctors of the world.
The last one I saw was in 2024. It was a Canadian study, and it showed that a little over 70% of people agreed with the idea that people who are born male should not participate in women's sports. And is that unfair? Yes, it is. But is it an unfairness that cannot be explained? No, it's you can't have everything in life. If you've decided that you're in the wrong body sexually, Well, there are going to be things you're going to be excluded from. I wish I would have been a better hockey player, because I really wanted, when I was about 12 years old, to play in the NHL, but my body wasn't built for it.
Yeah.
So is it unfair? Should there be a law that says I can be given whatever drugs are needed in order to beef me up until I can play professional hockey? No, it's just, there are things that happen in people's lives that are unfair, and we can be sympathetic, we can be supportive, we can find them all sorts of therapies and treatments, but that doesn't mean then we have to change the whole rest of the world so that they get to do everything they want.
Yeah. Billboard Chris Elston sometimes has a sandwich board. You probably know who I'm talking about. And some of his signs are so basic and they're so hard to argue with, like, no one is born in the wrong body. When you stop and think about that, that's so basic and profound. And imagine arguing, no, I was born in the wrong body. No, you weren't. No, you weren't. And of course, when you're a teenager and you have hormones and you're confused and your politics, sure, you have questions, but that is not the time to have, like you say, irreversible surgeries. When you said that the doctors sometimes are advocates who are racing to perform these treatments, it reminded me a little bit of MAID, medical assistance in dying, where there are some activists who are doctors and they almost immediately point depressed people in the direction of suicide. And I think there's a real problem with doctors who are not following the do no harm Hippocratic oath. And I think they're on the MAID and I think they're on the trans.
Yeah. There are a pair of doctors, for instance, on the West Coast, who between the two of them have done over 800 MAID deaths. Yeah. And that's because they were both strong advocates before the law was changed.
Yeah.
That you should be allowed to determine when your own death is, and so now that the law is there, they're very active in assisting people to get MAID.